Mac walked into my bar an hour before close. The only person I'd seen that day. The collar of his jacket was turned up and he seemed to be hiding his face as his eyes darted around the empty room.
Shit, it's fucking Mac.
I'd known him for years, but I barely recognized this timid man fidgeting in front of me. I dug deep and scrunched up a smile, asking if he wanted the usual.
Hey Mac, what's going on, man? Can I get you the usual?
He shook his head sharply, finally turning to face me. His eyes were dark, an unsettling hybrid of fear and pity.
I ain't come here for no drink. I only came here to warn you.
He cast another cautious glance over his shoulder before leaning in and whispering hoarsely.
I've heard talk around town. Folks are starting to think you're the one that's been killing them people.
The dread in my gut must have shown on my face because he immediately softened, adding,
I know it ain't you. You're a good man, and I've been telling folks as much. That's why I want to come here to warn you myself, so you'll be ready.
I started to ask him what he meant, but he got up and walked briskly out of the door without saying another word. The bell above the door jangled as he left in. I listened to it fade away into silence. I sighed heavily and looked around my empty bar. There used to be tons of people here not that long ago. My establishment had been a long-time staple of this town, a warm haven in a sometimes cold world, but business had dried up after someone started murdering my customers. Once my alibis had cleared, the favorite theory was someone had been stalking my patrons. They were all found the day after they'd visited my bar, gaping caverns where their guts were supposed to be. There were never any signs of struggle or forced entry, not even a hypothetical murder weapon. The police set up watches, but no matter how many officers they assigned, they were never able to catch the maniac in action. He kept right on killing my customers until I no longer had any customers left who dared to step through the door. Now, still with no leads, Max said the people in town were beginning to suspect me?
Mac said people in town were beginning to suspect me? Alibis be damned. If rumors of a serial killer didn't drive me out of business, this sure in the hell would.
I hadn't intended to yell, and the sound of it tearing through my throat startled me. It echoed between the empty furniture, amplifying my anger back at me, and I breathed deeply through my nose. The thought of having a drink hummed in my skull as it did most days, but tonight I felt powerless to resist the siren call. My wife had told me repeatedly that it was stupid of me to keep running the bar after I'd gone on the wagon, but it was only now that I was able to admit that she'd been right. I was an unrepentant alcoholic once, living in my own personal dream. I had a natural flair for mixing drinks, drawing necessary business in the early days, and I had held on to that talent even after I decided to go sober. I managed to enjoy my creations vicariously for years, drinking in my customers' delight. Finally, after resisting so much temptation, I found my breaking point. I mixed a batch of my latest masterpiece, a sweet, fruity cocktail that folks had been raving about before the murders began. I made a virgin one for myself when I was testing out the new recipe, but like any good bartender, I knew the true taste was hidden without the accompanying alcohol. It shimmered azure in the glass, swirling decadently between the ice cubes. I lifted it to my lips, breathing in the aroma, then stopped. I thought of my wife waiting at home, of the promise I'd sworn on my love for her. My hand shook, the ice clinking in front of my nose, the ambrosial scent calling to my desperation. With a strangled growl, I finally slammed the glass on the counter.
No.
My sides heaved as I panted, my knuckles going white as I gripped the edge of the bar. I decided to turn off the lights and close early, dealing with my failures tomorrow.
No. I'm just gonna go home. I'll deal with this tomorrow.
It was already late evening by the time I returned to open the bar, but I suspected it really didn't matter. The bell jingled as I walked in, greeting me with boss merriment. I was hanging my coat on the hook behind the door when the ringing went quiet. Somewhere in the room behind me, something was squishing softly. I spun around, straining to see what was hiding in the shadows. I reached blindly with one hand, flipping the bank of switches and flooding the room with light. The booths were empty. The wrecked boss sitting undisturbed on the pool table, the bottles twinkling on the shelves behind the counter. My drinks sat on the end of the bar, a reminder of last night's temptation. Something was moving in the glass. I approached it slowly, my face already twisting in disgust. I assumed that a mouse had fallen into my unconsumed drink, drowning slowly in a drunken haze, dying perhaps the best way I knew how. I slid my foot the last step, looking down into the glass as my stomach turned a cartwheel. There was no mouse. The drink had congealed overnight, forming a throbbing layer of tissue. It almost looked like something was pulsating underneath in short, steady bursts. My nose wrinkled as I swirled the glass around on the counter. It started vibrating. The glass clinked as it danced, and something tore the putrid membrane from the inside. I screamed, my horror doubling when the thing in the cocktail answered me in kind. A high, keening screech burbled up from the cloudy depths, and an almost reptilian eye peered at me from the rift. I stumbled, falling on my backside and scooting away from the thing writhing on the bar. My tongue felt silent as it tipped the glass on its side, my mind unable to grasp the strange geometry of the creature scuttling across the counter. I watched it, mesmerized as it crawled up the nearby wall and tore at the vent cover with clacking mandibles. Within a minute, all 14 inches of it had disappeared into the air ducts. I leaned forward, vomiting on the floor between my legs. The rotting, sweet stench of the creature's birth burned in my nostrils, my head swimming from the fumes. I realized two things as I wiped the spittle from my chin with the back of one shaking hand. Somehow, impossibly, I had discovered the recipe for horrifying life. I had also finally learned what had been tearing its way through my customers.